We are 4 episodes in now. This is coming along in a pretty promising way, I think. How do you feel?
I feel pretty good. It's definitely been a new adventure for me, so I'm learning a lot as the progress goes along, but it's been fun. It keeps me engaged. I'm definitely looking forward to keeping it going.
Same. And I want to say thank you to everyone that's listening, people that have followed us, people that have given us some feedback. We're basically hammering on our craft and refining as we go. Here we are. We're at the 4th episode. A little bit about us. We're a couple guys who noticed that there seems to be a lot of social, cultural, political issues. They all seem to be intertwined through and encapsulated in our digital age. So we decided to try this experiment where we sit down and we discuss the issues. A lot of people just can't have a positive or productive discourse anymore, so we wanted to see what we could add to that and what we could potentially produce. One thing about our show that makes us unique is we do not actually share with our audience what our political alignments are, because it shouldn't actually matter in terms of progress.
Absolutely. We're here to discuss objective information. We have our subjective takes on it, but the whole point is to demonstrate two people having a rationed, researched, and productive conversation about different socio-political issues, and we want to permeate that through our communities and any communities we generate. We want to make people a little bit more literate when it comes to politics and especially media literacy in the digital age, because we feel that things like social media and different news outlets are causing some harm to our ability to tangibly understand what's happening around us, and if we don't understand what's happening around us, we can't exactly improve. So
I guess we could just launch right in. We don't want to waste anyone's time. This week was pretty crazy in the House and Senate. The Democrats and Republicans actually had to work together for once, and they passed a $1.2 trillion spending package for government funding. The purpose of that package was to basically reinvest in key federal agencies whose funding was set to expire. From what I read, it was approximately 70% of the money was for defense initiatives and for the DoD. So now, on the bright side, before we get into the wild stuff, the bright side is we don't have to worry about the government shutdown potentially till fall. And then we'll have a ton of content for Republicans holding the country hostage. I'm excited.
Yeah, just as an early note, one thing that I really hope becomes an ever-increasing part of the conversation around these types of bills is the lunacy that it feels like every election cycle, every year especially, we have a new threat of government shutdown. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't seem like that should be a possibility, and the fact that it's threatened against the American people all the time now is just a starting point there that I'm exceedingly unhappy with, but all that set aside, we'll go into the specifics of this year.
Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that will come up here momentarily. I feel like I'll get triggered and just start ranting about it. The vote passed. It passed 286 to 134. But here's the thing. Not everybody was happy about it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's everybody's favorite far-right Georgian Republican QAnon adjacent nut job, she was so pissed that she actually mid-vote on the floor, she initiated a motion to vacate against the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Did you see why she said what her reasons were?
I saw some listed positions from other Republicans, but nothing specifically from her.
Oh, this was great. Her take is she believes that bipartisanship has no place in politics, and she and other far-right conservatives are essentially waging a war for the heart and soul of America. She said that the spending package was, quote, a Democrat-controlled bill, and the Speaker of the House needs to be someone that actually represents Republicans, not interests. But those interests, ironically, that she's talking about are the American people.
Okay, you know what's funny? I'm gonna call myself out a little bit. I did hear snippets of that quote, and in my mind, I just suppressed them as falsified or hyperbolic, because for whatever reason, despite MTG's reputation, I assumed that there was no way an active member of Congress could actually say those words. But here I am being proven wrong, so I'm gonna call myself out there for being short-sighted, but wow, that's utterly mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to be that tone deaf.
I don't know, it seems pretty par for the course for what we've been talking about. I'm just, maybe maybe at the end of all this, we'll give her a badge of honor for being transparent, unlike the rest of them.
Like, it's wild that when you say that these are non-Republican interests, because they're talking about government workers, feds, contractors, the military. Like, what the are we talking about? I think that if you are anti-bipartisanship as a senator, you should be out of a job. I think if the government shuts down and you did not have a vote to prevent that, you should be out of a job. Because
100%.
I don't care what anyone says. Like, you can like her because she's flashy or she's controversial or whatever. It's good publicity to get people's eyes on a topic. Like, that's great. But I think if you're on 20 committees and you have never produced anything other than culture war nonsense or talking points to stir up your voter base for the sake of, I don't know, whether it's re-election campaigns or a particular thing that you want to promote on like Fox News, or if you've never produced any substantial legislation or policy to actually help your own voter base, you should be out of a job. Like, you're not doing your job.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, not to put too fine a point on it. I actually think Mike Johnson did his job. Because he voted for it. He whipped votes. He negotiated the bill because originally there was way more spending. And Republicans, they want to be more fiscally responsible, or so they claim. He did his job by every metric. He prevented the government from shutting down. He got Democrats and Republicans to work together. He negotiated the bills to make Republicans feel better. Democrats got a ton of funding for Head Start programs and child care services for the military, which is something that Republicans also claim they care about. And on top of that, I think they got like 8,000 more border agents and migrant camps. And it seems like everyone won, so I don't know why she would do this.
Yeah, let me clarify the statement that I made earlier. The reason I want to give her kudos is because she put her rotten face in front of the American public, and I'm hoping that we do with that information the right thing and get this demon out of her position. I mean, she's a MAGA cultist that is trying to spearhead, or whether it's of her own volition or somebody else's, spearhead this MAGA movement that is just antithetical to any American progress whatsoever. And as you said, this bill is considered by many people, even in Congress, a unilateral win for both parties. Both of them got things that they desperately wanted. I heard some things being espoused that some Republicans felt that it was too weak on the border crisis, etc., etc. But as you just mentioned, they procured a ton of things that would go towards that. They got an increase in the number of ICE detention beds, tons of more border agents, and there was all kinds of other things that they got. More specifically, because apparently this was really, really, really important for people, they got the Consumer Product Safety Commission to step down from the banning of gas stoves, and then they also got a huge victory in their eyes that prevents diplomatic facilities across the globe from flying flags that aren't official U.S. flags. And for clarification on that, because I read a different article specifying, specifically LGBTQ flags or pride flags were no longer allowed to be flown in front of U.S. diplomatic buildings across the world. So that was a big win for Republicans, supposedly, according to themselves. But yeah, Democrats secured a huge amount of funding for important benefits, things that are even, bipartisan important. We have all these different allocations for low-income home energy assistance programs. Small Business Administration got $1.18 billion, $316 million for entrepreneurial development grants. These are all things that should be unilaterally loved and accepted. And as Speaker of the House, like you said, this is absolutely what you're in that chair to do. And they just got rid of the last speaker because they didn't represent their needs. He comes in, initially has some conflict and controversy, but he did the right thing here, and immediately the MAGA cultists are trying to oust him because they're being honest. They're saying up front, we don't care about the greater needs of the American people. We are here to represent ourselves and our very specific praised niche of people.
Oh, I also forgot to mention that Democrats also got an increase in cancer research and Alzheimer's research. That's a W. I think a lot of this is to the benefit of the American people, right? What frustrates me is when you impede progress. These are people that chose to serve. They're saying things like this bill was nothing shy of a complete surrender for conservative values, what conservatives wanted. They're getting bullied, they're getting steamrolled, they're being manipulated. None of that's true.
Yeah, no, it's ultimately them saying. I mean, it's an admission that the values that we hold near and dear are being ignored because it's good for the American citizens. I mean, I think reading between those lines should really, hopefully, be eye-opening for a lot of people. I'm always cynical about the fact that it won't open as many eyes as it should, but it's shocking to me that they would see something so unilaterally acceptable and so necessary. Because again, holding hostage the idea of the federal government and most of its agencies just not showing up for work, just shutting down completely for an indeterminate amount of time, is completely unacceptable. It shouldn't even be allowed. There should be legal provisions that prevent it. It shouldn't have to be a matter of conversation where they get together with themselves and decide whether or not they're going to be allowed to continue to exist. I mean, if we're that fragile, then I think radical change has to start occurring, but it needs to start with getting these people out of their positions of power that are literally trying to prevent the American people from moving forward or trying to prohibit any sort of future prosperity.
You are absolutely correct. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. Wouldn't it be interesting, though, kind of like on a funny note, if she voted to oust Mike Johnson, but like when they come back next week to vote on it, they vote her out instead? Wouldn't that be awesome?
God, I hope so. That would be just a freaking dream of mine. I mean, I've been wanting this person and people like her to be gone for a long time, and with people in the House now dropping like flies left and right. I mean, you're having representatives resign. You have another one set to resign next month on the 19th. The House is already becoming razor thin. They can't even get themselves to agree on what they want. This person is one of the major dissenting voices. This is an opportunity for Republicans to reclaim some semblance of sanity and really just remove the parasite that is MTG, remove the tumor, so to speak.
No, I agree. I think that Republicans should be tired of the average person viewing them either as like psychotic authoritarian worshippers or as giant children who throw tantrums like this when they don't get what they want.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be the first people here on the show give them props. I know other people will downplay it and say that it's long overdue and that her existence and prominence in that party shouldn't have been there in the first place, but hey, it's a win, and it will be celebrated as a win, so I'm challenging the GOP to do the right thing here. I'm challenging the House. Boot this monster out of there so that way you can actually start to represent the constituency that you claim to represent.
I mean, there's not too much more for us to say. I mean, it is what it is. We're going to know more this coming week when they re-adjourn to vote on it. Apparently they started the vote but then suspended it. So it's not like it'll just get swept under the rug. They will have to address this.
Yeah, the only other piece that I'm curious to follow as time moves on is the provision that halted all funding to the UNWRA. So that is a United Nations agency that provides aid to Palestinians. The provision in this bill halts all funding for that organization until March of 2025. So for the next year, that organization will receive no funding from the US government. This is because of a report that came out that suggested that the UNWRA staffers took part in the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. There was a deposition that was given by a prominent member of a certain U.S. department, Richard Goldberg, he's a senior advisor for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So, it's a foundation, not a member of the government specifically, but he went before Congress and told them that they specifically needed to halt all funding to this organization because there was evidence that they had ties to multiple terrorist organizations, and provisions needed to be put in place to prevent them from actually secretly or inadvertently, so to speak, funding terrorist organizations using U.S. taxpayer dollars.
And there's actually merit to this claim?
I read it. There's a 9-page testimony that I will link to you so that way we can get it to our listeners, but it looks to me like there's loose evidence. There's enough of it to be taken seriously by the U.S. federal government. So I guess in that perspective, it's enough.
Enough to at least warrant an investigation.
Correct. So
Okay.
a lot of the tenets of the issues is that there was supposedly images and videos captured that schools in Gaza that had been built and operated by the UNRWA organization. There was supposedly underground tunnels that were being used for terrorist activities. There was apparently weapons allocations in some of these facilities. The organization has a history of misrepresenting the amount of people that they deliver aid to. It's a bit iffy. This is one thing that I wanted to go into a very deep dive on separately. I'm only going to mention it as sort of the tail end of this conversation because I think this is going to have the largest ripple effect in foreign policy of anything that we discuss, by far of anything we discuss. So I will probably mention it on the next episode with more detailed information, any follow-up I could find.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention because I actually had not heard about that. That was something I missed, so...
Yeah, I'll make sure to link it so everyone can read the 9-page testimony from Mr. Goldberg, and then I will do more research to see if there's any elaboration or follow-up on that.
Okay, very cool. But in terms of bureaucrats not working for the American people, in terms of private interests, in terms of corporations, in terms of all these things that, people like MTG espouse, we actually have proof of some of these things in a very tragic event that happened earlier in the week, which was the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsing in Baltimore.
Yeah, so on the morning of March 26, a container ship named Dolly crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland. The crash actually was into a support pillar for the bridge and caused the entire bridge to collapse. There are some different details about it, but essentially it's a 1.6 mile bridge that runs kind of through the heart of Baltimore over a major river. The subsequent crash has then caused a ripple effect that includes the Port of Baltimore being essentially shut down while they try to clear the wreckage. Initially, there were 6 people that were reported missing or unaccounted for as a result of the crash. They have since found, from the information that I last saw, there had been 2 people that had been recovered, but there are still several people missing, most of which were workers on the bridge at the time of the crash.
Yeah, I had heard that there's various reports that also said multiple vehicles had gone into the water, and from what I had read, recovery efforts were suspended after they had recovered the 2 bodies because there were hazardous materials at play in the water.
Yeah, the ship was it was a container ship, a very large container ship that was carrying several hazardous materials, some of which include like lithium-ion batteries that had been put into the water. At the time of the initial search and rescue measures, it had reached a point where it was so dark out and they were diving and navigating around, the wreckage of the bridge itself that they had suspended the recovery operations just because it became too much of a hazard for the divers. So there are some people that they are still searching for as of the last time that I checked, which was this morning. But yeah, the ship reportedly had lost power and drifted into the pillar of the bridge. There is video of the incident in which you can see lights flickering on and off. There's even like some smoke puffing out of the ship just right leading up into the moments of the crash. Thankfully, some good things, or not good things, but some things that had come from it half an hour before the actual impact, a Mayday warning had been issued to local authorities, and they were able to mitigate and stop active traffic that was going over the bridge. So the catastrophe could have been a lot worse in terms of loss of life. So, thankfully that happened, but unfortunately there were still some pretty major ramifications from it.
Yeah, there was a guy that was running down the bridge, apparently, a first responder or someone that was part of the crew. I guess he was trying to warn the construction workers, but he couldn't make it in time, and the bridge unfortunately collapsed. So
yeah, it's an unfortunate development of the story that there were some construction workers in work vehicles that were working on repairing potholes on the bridge. One of their co-workers, Jesus Campos, who works for the state of Maryland, said that those workers were unfortunately not given the Mayday warning. As you said, there was people trying to attempt to contact them, but they weren't do it in time. Those men are still of the group that are reported missing, so we hope for them and their families that they're found soon. Just some other notes about the area and the ship. So the port of Baltimore is actually, for folks that don't know, it is a major port in the United States, especially for the East Coast. Last year, it actually recorded a record 52.3 million tons of cargo, roughly $80 billion worth of cargo, including one of the main imports through this port are automotive manufacturing parts and cars that are manufactured in different countries across the globe. And farming equipment is another major import. Container ships are not as common, so to speak, but they do still frequently travel in and out of the port. It's definitely going to cause a ripple effect economically for the region and for the country as a whole. Multiple government officials have already announced that there should be expected economic and supply chain issues, which is something that we're already, still kind of suffering from post-pandemic with supply chain problems. This is only going to exacerbate or add to them, unfortunately. So from 1960 to 2015, there were 35 major bridge collapses due to a ship or barge collision. This is the first or most notable ship collision that caused a bridge collapse in several
years, you said?
Yeah.
Did you happen to read anything about the investigations that have gone on thus far?
There's been a lot of conversations and honestly, sadly, conspiracies that have led from the investigation as to what caused this issue.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah, no, the predominant response from most port authorities, experts in the field, fellow ship captains and people that have had lifelong careers in maritime navigation, especially in cargo ship maneuvering, said that the predominant and obvious explanation is that the ship went through a series of malfunctions. A ship that is that size, a vessel that is that size, losing power, traveling 9 miles an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're considering the amount of tonnage that's being moved at that speed, it has a very obvious and clear impact on any infrastructure that it happens to collide with. So while it has, kind of sparked some conversations about the quality of the infrastructure of that bridge, nobody is surprised that once that impact takes place, it would have a pretty similar effect on any bridge of that size.
Well, yeah, you're talking about something that's 1,000 feet long.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think it's being, like, most people, this is well agreed upon, except for the, like you said, we'll talk about it and go more in depth in it, but the fringe conspiracy theorists that always want to make everything a Black Swan event. But, as far as anything other than that, I haven't gone more in depth. I was just reading the multiple interviews with Mr. Campos, who worked for the state, as I said earlier, and right now the investigation's ongoing. They're saying that it could take months for the wreckage to be fully cleaned up out of the port. I believe Biden has already allocated, I want to say it was $60 billion in aid for Baltimore to help sort of combat the negative ramifications of the wreckage and to help clean it up. I know Pete Buttigieg has already made some comments about the ripple effect that this is going to have on other things in terms of transportation and e-commerce, but I haven't done too much in-depth reading outside of that.
Gotcha. Well, at the time of the recording, we know that the black box was recovered. The crew was interviewed. They're all cooperating. The FBI was involved, which obviously sparked all the more speculation, right? It seems like everyone's cooperating. From a tertiary glance, it looks like the way that the investigations are held, it's not that different than the way, like, if there's an airplane crash, they have to check in with the crew, they have to make sure that everyone followed procedure, they have to make sure that maydays were issued, you know what I mean? So
yeah, definitely.
Even the company that manufactured the ship, which was Hyundai, they are actually cooperating. It was really interesting. There was a Danish shipping company who contracted the Dali to haul cargo for them to, like, Sri Lanka, right? It was supposed to be like a 30-day or 29-day journey. This company Maersk, I think it's called. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm probably Maersk. Thank you. I knew I was butchering it. They've actually, last year, the feds went after them for silencing whistleblowers. Although there was none of their crew on board, I do think that still deserves mentioning, because I think it illustrates a larger topic, which we're going to get into with conspiracies and stuff. But it illustrates that corporations do not care about you, the worker, and they're actively manipulating regulatory systems and blocking people who actually do care and actually do seek out government help or to speak out against these kind of things. We just covered this last week with Boeing as well.
Yeah, I do want to add some context for people that may not know. I have maybe a little bit more information than some people outside of the industry, just because I actually used to work in the container ship industry, and that name has popped up along my workload several times. For people that don't know, Maersk is a massive company. If you've never heard the name, the next time you're on any freeway, just look around you and the name is everywhere. This is the, since we talked about it last week, this is by and large the Boeing of greater logistics and shipping infrastructure. In fact, I would say that to compare them to Boeing would actually be to potentially undersell their influence across the globe. They are one of the largest companies for global movement of any sort of freight across the entire planet. This company is one of the last companies that you want to have silencing whistleblowers when you understand the severity and the necessity of their work and their business. This is the last thing that you want to see coming across it.
Yeah, they actually had one gal that reached out to, I believe it was the Coast Guard, and she was immediately fired. So they actually had a policy, a zero tolerance policy, which I believe they were fined for.
Yeah, I mean, this leads credence to certain, it's going to reopen a lot of conversations about privatization of certain industries versus government influence, but this, like with air travel, goes hand in hand with the governments are heavily involved in anything that happens with these companies, but still not creating enough provisions to actually reduce or hold these companies to a higher standard of how they treat their employees, especially when it comes to operational and engineering failures. Now, before anyone claims that I'm adding more conspiratorial tones to this particular incident, I'm not saying anything about their involvement or their failures in regards to the incident. I'm strictly commenting on their response to the incident, which is correct. Not great.
I was just gonna say, we're not trying to muddy the waters or anything. I wanted to put that out there because we just covered something eerily similar. So although their people weren't on board the ship, I just thought it was worth mentioning that this is a pattern of behavior that these people do have.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's definitely important to highlight, just for the sake of clarification, like we said. We're not trying to throw Maersk directly under the bus. We're just saying these kind of responses to these incidents are, let's just say, inappropriate or alarming.
I think alarming is a good word.
Yeah.
But, of course, tragic events like this produce tons and tons and tons of speculation. Some is good in good faith, some is not so much. I went online, I was seeing everything from armchair engineers to actual bridge inspectors, QAnon groups, and of course my favorite, racists. They all were in droves flocking to social media platforms to discuss this particular issue.
Yeah, I tried not to read too much into a lot of it as far as their evaluations of what caused the crash, because I've heard everything from this is Russia to this is ISIS to this is China to this is the US attacking its own infrastructure. I've heard every conspiracy theory under the sun. The one that I sort of fixated or magnetized to the most was, of course, them going as far in the MAGA cultist side to call out the mayor of the city of Baltimore, saying that he's an example of a DEI hire that has led to the downfall of certain parts of their city, and have even put him as the forefront of the blame for this particular incident, which is just disgusting and absurd.
I Well, let's take it up a notch even, because when I was following this as it happened, the very first argument seemed to be it was a black captain. And then it became, oh, well, the black captain and black navigator. And then it became black engineers built a shoddy boat. And then when all of that fell through, then it became, well, the mayor's black, and he clearly is a DEI hire because no real mayor with any, wherewithal would allow such oversight. I mean, it got wild. I guess it doesn't matter that mayor graduated from one of the best schools in the country. Like, and I guess in their mind, any successful black person is, that they don't deserve to be there. They're a DEI or a diversity hire. Even though wasn't it like something like 70% of Baltimore's black, or the DMV area is black, so like a white mayor would have been the DEI hire.
Yeah, no. First of all, let me just say, there's no such thing as a DEI hire in a democratically held election. So before we go any further, the whole DEI hire thing attributed to an elected official is absolutely insane. And I think, 70% or something similar to that of the city is black, so he would represent the majority of that demographic. But didn't he also win the election in a landslide? I mean, yes. I thought I also read the 70% is similar to the percentage of votes that he procured to win that election.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, when are we going to be so exhausted by this? I mean, it's like, it comes out of one mouth and then it just gets mimicked like the freaking seagulls from Finding Nemo. They're all just shouting DEI at the top of their lungs mindlessly every time somebody not white does something bad or is associated around something bad. But they completely lost their grip on this one, and like you said, instead of admitting defeat, they just kept going down to different rungs on the ladder to find the black person or the non-white person that could be blamed for this.
Just say you hate black people. Like, it's a lot less work. Just say it. Say the word. Just say the N-word already.
Yeah,
good
exactly.
Lord. Say it.
Just say that they're ruining the world and that you want them all to be not equal because you already view them as such.
Yeah, it's so wild, man. And like, again, none of the stuff they espoused was true. To me, this is just social engineering. It sets out to make non-black people feel like they're being targeted or harassed. There's no statistical evidence that supports any of the claims that they make in any way. It's actually the complete opposite. And I think it's kind of, there's no kind of about it. I think it's truly despicable and shameful and honestly disrespectful to the memories of the people that lost their lives in this event to use this as an opportunity to push some propaganda.
Of course. I mean, just looking past the fact that it's been used for every geopolitical conspiracy theory, there are people that are, like I said, they've been using the term Black Swan event, which for people that may not know what that means, that is a term that has been coined within the last, I want to say 10 to 15 years, to describe events that have massive ripple effects on the world around us, even if often misunderstood and misrepresented. So the fact that this was a perfect example of people misrepresenting and misunderstanding while very serious, a disingenuously serious event, just leads even more credence to the fact that there is a pervasive brain rot that is happening around all things domestic policy and U.S. politics and even international politics and the discussions around them. It's starting to hurt my head. Like, I have a low-grade migraine from reading DEI in everything that I see happening in this country, even though there's just a overwhelming amount of information that points to corporate oversight, corporate greed, lack of investment in American infrastructure, you name it. Like, literally, you name anything related to policy that may have led to this, but of course it has to be about racism.
Bro, I'm telling you, we're sliding backwards. You're gonna see a full emergence of some old concepts, like suppressing the black vote, especially for older people. Then it's like we're removing affirmative action. Now we're painting narratives that black people are actually the most racist and homophobic in the country, and that they actually hate white people. And now we're doing DEI attacks. Like, it's just exhausting. And it's just like, I don't know where we really go from here. We're gonna have politicians do something about this, but I honestly, genuinely believe they don't want to. I think they want us to go back to like Reconstruction era.
Yep. Or it's like if they want to, or the concession that the bottom line concession that I'd be willing to make, like we made about the whole Trump existence and predominance, is that they're perfectly complicit with that outcome. So, but it seems.
Oh no, I went full hyperbolic. I said they want to lose, and I stand by that still.
Yeah, no, I know, and like I said, I'm not. It's not going to take much more for me to be pushed over to that edge. I'm just trying to be somewhat conservative in that take, but it's becoming more and more difficult to stand by it. So I would say that everything that you see that is just poisoning the well of American culture is a result of negligence or malevolence by our politician.
Yeah. I just kind of want to point out some of the facts that they got wrong. Some of the people were saying, I guess the armchair engineers is kind of what I'm going to call them, were trying to debate. Did you see any of that?
I saw mention of it, but like I said, I kind of blocked out a lot of it, maybe for better or for worse.
No, for better. I'm worse for having read through a lot of it. So they were basically espousing that this was planned because clearly a bridge of this magnitude that's almost 2 miles long would have like bumpers to guard the support structures, but I guess the bridge is so old that at that time they didn't have boats that moved as fast or were as strong as the ones we have now, so there was no need for it. I guess then they moved the goalpost again, and it was like, well, a boat like this needs to have a tugboat out in front leading it as like a spotter or as a scout. I guess when it comes to that particular maritime area, that's not required, so it's not like they intentionally just didn't give them a spotter and then had sent this thing reveering off into a bridge to do a false flag. Again, you kind of alluded to it. We have a former general of the United States Army, Mike Flynn, coming out saying this is a black swan attack. If you really want to know more, like, look at who should be in charge of these things. It's like, okay, bro. Oh, one of my favorite ones is that because this was a Singaporean flagged ship, this is proof of China's involvement in China doing a remote terrorist attack on America. I don't know, man. I think my brain is getting smoother even just recounting some of these. But it's just weird how the truth only seems to matter if it supplements their already pre-established worldview, and then otherwise you have to twist it and pervert it to make it fit your worldview. But the reality is like, I think people need to focus on economic forces that collaborate to expedite profit at the cost of safety, instead of, basically blame everyone that doesn't look like you for why something goes wrong. And no, I don't mean the Jews when I say like economic forces that collaborate, right?
Yes, but these are also, that's exactly what you must mean, brother.
But the same people that would blame the Jews for this kind of thing, or the same people that would launch into these dialogues, are ironically the same people that dick ride Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as self-made men, and they're so based and they're all about the working class white man. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't know how many more lawsuits, criminal charges, and documentaries we have to go through in order for capitalists and corporations to finally be at the forefront of blame for a lot of the things that are wrong globally, but apparently more of them. And I like I said, I don't understand how this becomes so obfuscated so quickly, even though there is an overwhelming body of evidence that demonstrates that the pursuit of maximizing profit margins has been one of the clear-cut indicators of shitty infrastructure, destroyed ecosystems, a destroyed planet, rampant poverty levels across the globe. I mean, I don't understand. I'll do a deeper dive into that rant because there's just such a dense amount of information that goes into that, the things that I say about it. But yeah, the fact that this has to be, and is even being espoused by former very high up members of the US government, talking about it being a black swan event and it being some sort of proof that China and Singapore are still collaborating to take down the West. It's all kind of looping back to the TikTok CEO being put under fire for being a CCP member, even though he's not Chinese. It just kind of further demonstrates a blatant racism that's prevalent throughout American politics. The other thing that I was going to mention about the tugboat thing, or about having spotters in this particular body of water, every vessel of this kind has the captain or the shipmaster, and it has something called a pilot. The pilot is the expert on the local body of water. That is their entire role. This is a well-known, widely available piece of information. It is the standard of the industry that every ship that goes through channels of bodies of water has local, basically gurus on the specific bodies of water in the ports that they're coming in and out of. So this idea that there was this gross negligence and oversight in terms of the ship having this issue is just patently false. There is somebody who is there specifically because they are an expert on the port of Baltimore. The ship fucking malfunctioned. The ship is almost the size of the freaking Eiffel Tower. So of course if it crashes into a bridge that's old and has maybe some weaker infrastructure or oversights of infrastructure that pre-exist all DEI hires, then yeah, it's gonna take down a bridge. Okay, this is a tragedy, and I need tragedies to stop being so heavily weaponized for basic racist sentiment.
Or, I hear what you're saying, okay, but you're woke. Black people crashed the boat. Black people are bad engineers. Black people built the bridge, and then Mexicans died. So, you know.
Right. Even though the person that piloted the ship was, the captain was he Indian, I think? They tried to espouse an early conspiracy theory that it was a Ukrainian captain, and so for some reason that was evidence that the Ukraine now was attacking the United States. I'm not really sure where that comes from.
I missed that one. That's wild as f***.
Yeah, again, the conspiracy theories have gone down wild rabbit holes, but I was just trying to find this recently. And yeah, no, at one point, I'm going to look it up here just to reaffirm that I didn't completely misrepresent what I just said. But...
Oh no, I believe you. I know you do your due diligence, but how do they even link these things together?
Yeah, I have no idea, but yes. So there was a claim that was being permeated throughout the internet that the captain of Dali, the container ship that crashed into the bridge, is Ukrainian. AP News and other news sources and outlets dug into this claim, found that it was false, and it was based on a Ukrainian man who was listed on a maritime jobs database as captaining that ship for about 5 months back in 2016. The Dali's current captain and crew are Indian, and Synergy Marine Group is the one who actually manages the ship. So right. I don't understand how we've worked around to black people are the problem, or this is a geopolitical act of war that's going to change the nature of the country forever.
Yeah, India is an American ally. Sorry to disappoint you. Ukraine is an American ally. Sorry to disappoint you. It's
just blatantly false, and frankly, I know that it's difficult to come up with a tangible solution, but it just seems like we're so far gone in certain political circles that something needs to be done to course correct this, because we're gonna spiral back into freaking Jim Crow era thinking at this point with the trajectory that we're on.
I have a wild egg for you.
Okay.
I'm predicting that there will be an anti-black reprisal hate crime as a result of this. Like, I'm not saying that the black community gets firebombed because of the boat crashing. I'm just saying that in the next year or two, if we find a mass shooting happens against like a predominantly black community and the manifesto gets leaked, it would not surprise me in the least that something like this was in there. And the only reason I say that is because Twitter or X is so oversaturated with claims about like DEI and things like that. So it doesn't even matter what AP, big props to AP, by the way, for debunking this nonsense. It doesn't really matter what they say, because people have already made it up in their minds what the truth is. What their truth is, I should say.
Yeah, I think this would be a cited collection of justifications that led up to the event, because every bad thing that happens from American corporations, which of course have this unfettered, untarnished reputation throughout their histories. Of course, they're just the greatest things ever. Clearly, black people are at the heart of all failures of American society today.
I don't mean to just make this about black people. Like, a lot of these people, I think they don't live in diverse areas, so they're not dealing with, like, Indian people, Asian people, black people, what have you, right? even other types of white people, like Europeans or something. I think that they're probably in like homogenized communities, like gated communities or like upper middle class communities. I think that it's easier for them to reconcile blaming a group or a person for the events like this than to come to terms with the fact that they do not have control over their lives in a lot of regards, and that corporations have established, for lack of a better buzzword, oligarchies.
Yeah.
So I think it's cope.
No, it is, but I mean, we're also in a time now where since COVID and Donald Trump's presidency, everything has to be a conspiracy. And that is honestly what these groups of people prefer. They prefer to view the world as anything other than what it really is, because it helps explain and scapegoat the reason that their reality isn't manifesting in the way they wish it was. Even though there are obvious and much more clear indicators of who is responsible or what is responsible, they feel better and safer attributing it to this malicious, racist narrative.
I have no problem addressing conspiracies. I have no problem talking to conspiracy theorists most of the time. I have no problem exploring them, but you have to temper what you believe, and you have to like constantly, fact check or like find the lines, be able to trace the lines. But it seems like people are just making wild jumps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even reading about a conspiracy that circulated through Twitter right now, that this bridge collapse had to do with the death of Angela Chow. I mean, again, people just want to think of whatever they can to both. I think it's a two-headed snake, because I think it's part one, people coping and trying to invent sanctuaries for their failed reality, and two, social media now being the most predominant way that people get news, and the fact that it's directly incentivized for engagement means that people want to be the first to say the shit no one else is saying, because it's sensationalist and it gets you attention and you can monetize it.
That's just capitalism.
I know. God forbid that be the one to blame for a lot of this, but we're not ready for that conversation.
That's true.
But there was even some fringe people. I don't know how prevalent this conspiracy was, but yeah, there are people who tried to attach this to Angela Chow's recent untimely death because they misattributed that she was the CEO of the company that owns the ship, when that's just blatantly false.
Was that Mitch McConnell's wife's sister?
Yeah. Yep.
What? So the gal that had the Tesla mishap and she drowned?
Yeah, well, it turned out that after the police investigation, she was, I think it was 2 to 3 times over the legal limit for blood alcohol content. And she backed her Tesla into her pond on her massive property and drowned. But yeah, somebody was espousing on X that, she is supposedly drunk, backs into her car, into a pond and dies, and then a few weeks later, a massive cargo ship she used to control rams into this bridge and collapses it. They said, did this bridge collapse happen on purpose, and was Angela Chow killed because she stumbled upon the real plot? It goes back to this grand...
What's the plot?
Exactly. No one knows.
Exactly.
No one has any idea.
Well, I would argue that is going to be one of the ham-fisted attempts that they make to say that, this is a Chinese terrorist attack or some shit.
Yeah. I mean, basic level research, surface level research shows that she has nothing to do with that at all.
You're wrong. You're wrong, brother. They injected her with alcohol to make it look like she was drunk, and then they her.
Yes, of course, because anyone even remotely associated with big business or Republicans specifically is being systematically offed one by one by the woke World Economic Forum. They're force-feeding her alcoholic crickets so she ODs and dies in her own property.
That's true. Actually, full disclosure, since we're so honest with our audience, I don't know about you, but I'm applying. The whole reason we're doing this, I'm applying for the liberal Illuminati. Give me a call, guys. Yep.
Yeah, I'm actually secretly a member.
Oh, so that's why you're here to test me
exactly.
out. Okay. All right. Cool.
This is your trial.
How many rich billionaires' wives do I have to inject with alcohol to get on the roster?
At least 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Wild, dude. And you know what's funny? In the future, someone will clip this out of context.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the near future. I can see this conversation on X within the month.
Oh God, yeah. Well, if our some of our accounts keep going the way they're going, yeah, I can see it too. Yeah, that's ultimately. I don't want to detract or make light of a tragedy too much. It was a terrible event. People need to be held accountable, including like any sort of like oversight failures. I think a lot of this just unfortunately was either a mechanical or like an electrical problem. Our hearts go out with the family. We hope that they get their loved ones back so they can have a proper burial and have some closure. But just avoid X and avoid the conspiracies. If you start hearing people espousing it, don't take the bait. Don't go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, these people, as much as we're talking about the things that they say, I want it to be clear, these people are pathetic losers, and they don't deserve the airtime any more than we've given them, so I don't want to give them anything else.
No, that's perfectly fair, and I agree. But speaking of, pathetic losers, that's a hell of a segue, I guess.
Not even just that, the poster child, the messiah of the people that we're talking about.
Oh yeah, the God King.
God King Trump, baby.
My man managed to pull off something spectacular. I almost respect this, the way that this was done. Do you want to kind of tell the audience about what we've coined off camera as the Trump and dump?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that may not be aware, Trump has been in the middle of several criminal trials. The one that we're going to be talking about today is the third of four, the fourth one being upcoming in the next month, I believe, in which he was initially ordered to pay $354.9 million in penalties for committing fraud by overinflating his net worth to dupe lenders into giving him higher loans and better interest rates on those loans. What this means is that he was basically falsifying the worth of his properties and businesses, his assets, so to speak, in order to convince lenders that he was entitled to a certain amount of money loaned to him, and also because of his evaluations, he was actually getting preferable or lower interest rates on those loans, allowing him to have a lot more money secured for him specifically that he could use to further his net worth.
Come on, man. He's just playing the game.
Well, and we'll touch on this later, but it's a completely victimless crime, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, totally.
But anyway, the presiding judge originally ruled back in September 2023 that it was actually supposed to result in the dissolution of the companies that control his real estate empire. This would include Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, etc. But that ruling was deemed no longer necessary under the premise that he would be appointing an independent monitor to oversee these businesses. Since that $354.9 million ruling order to pay, it actually got raised to upwards of, I think it was 464 million was the cap. This was the end result of a 3-month-long trial that was initiated by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, I apologize.
You are a woke lawyer, woke hater.
Yeah, exactly. This is a clear target against Trump and MAGA and Republicans, etc., etc., etc. But what's interesting, and part of the reason that this has been given oxygen, this flame has been given oxygen, is that the supposed fraud that took place was based on something that occurred about a decade ago, and so that's why it's giving credence to the fact that this is all an attack against him unnecessarily because it's an election year. But this isn't even the first incident that the organization or Trump organization has had. They were found guilty of tax fraud in 2022. The CFO of the Trump organization has actually been barred for life from managing any New York company's finances because he had previously pleaded guilty to incidents of fraud. And then another thing is, during the trial, the judge even stated that Trump's behavior worked against him directly and made him less lenient. That being said, on March 25th, he somehow wins the bid to pause the $454 million judgment if he posts a reduced $175 million bond within 10 days of the ruling. So despite all of the things that were surrounding this and all the circumstances, he still was granted essentially a reduced bond, and was even given an extension because, according to Trump and his lawyer, he would be forced to sell all of his assets at, quote, fire sale prices to post the original bond, even though he had recently, in last year, given a deposition in which he claimed to have $400 million plus in cash lying around. Along with the other two trials, this now means that he's been able to successfully negotiate delays in all three of his active criminal trials, including the ruling where he has to pay out to E. Jean Carroll for the rape case that he lost. And I don't even remember what the other one was, but...
Hold on, brother. That's civil suit. He's not a criminal, brother. Don't you know?
Oh, yes, of course.
It's not the same, brother, even though that's, statute of limitations and all that.
Yeah, my apologies. Sorry. I don't want to be spreading fake news or misinformation. They're going to be after me shortly after this episode airs. But then, this is where the sort of the meat of the story comes from. Shortly after the decision was made to offer him the reduced $175 million option, we learned that Truth Social, or the parent company that owns Truth Social, had actually gone through a merger with a conglomerate known as Digital World Acquisition Group. It's a shell company, excuse me, not a conglomerate. And they would actually go through a merger that would permit Truth Social to go public and trade on the New York Stock Exchange, which is, well, let's just say...
Awesome.
Awesome for Donald Trump.
Awesome.
It's just awesome for him. Trump owns 79 million shares of that company,
which is like over 60%.
Exactly.
Right?
He is the
it's like
vast
closer to
majority
70.
holder. And recently the company had its first day had gone public.
Yes.
And the stock surged 39% in the earlier half of the day. At one point, at the peak of that day, it had reached an undiluted valuation of over $10 billion as a company.
Now, hold on. Say that again. It's billion with a B. Because I actually read it was 8. But if you're saying it's 10, oh, bro, that makes the story even better. Billion with a B. Fucking $10 billion.
So I'll clarify. So at the point of surge, when it had skyrocketed up 39%, that peak was a valuation of 10 billion with a B. When the day closed at a 16% increase, that's where it settled down into its $8 billion valuation. So the $8 billion number is still accurate in terms of its current evaluation. I'm putting current evaluation in quotes for the audience, just so you know, because there is tons of information or sketchy circumstances around that number. But anyway, yeah, so he is slapped with this massive criminal fine. I mean, massive. Even though it's a whole separate cheapening of the issue to knock it down to $175 million. $175 million is more than any of us or anyone listening will probably ever touch in 3 or 4 or 5 lifetimes, let alone the current one. And the fact that he had 10 days to pay that, and then shortly afterward, not only announces that he has basically been, I'm going to say, bought out of that by this shell company, but he's also now selling Bibles in order to definitely not pay off these debts.
Hold on. Yeah, we do need to tell the audience that we contemplated buying a Bible. We contemplated going in together to buy a Bible for content.
Listen, I'm going to leave it up to people to help us comment and decide, but the reason that we debated it is because it could absolutely be good for highlighting the hypocrisies of him and his administration. But anyway, for those that are going to jump in here, I will add some much needed but also fascinating clarification on this. There were talks post-merger that a very common procedure would be put in place, or a very common thing would be put in place to prevent this sort of pump and dump that we're saying that definitely may or may not have happened. There's a condition, it's called a lockup provision, that would prevent him from dumping his shares. It's pretty normal on Wall Street for mergers, and it would potentially, if the company decided to go with this, which I haven't found any concrete information on whether or not they have, shockingly enough, it would actually make it against the law for him to sell any of those shares within 6 months. However, one thing I did find interesting is that a major exception to that includes transfers of shares to immediate family members.
Correct. I was going to say, from what I had read, they were more concerned about him actually borrowing against the stock.
Right.
And he can't, from my understanding, he can't borrow against the stock as long as he's on the board. But he's not on the board anymore. But he has family that are. Correct.
Yeah, so the reason I bring this up, and the reason I'm trying to be very careful with setting this stage, is because I don't want people to jump in and nitpick the specific pump and dump vernacular as if we're implying that the only way he could achieve this is by specifically going through the merger, injecting himself specifically by selling, inflating the stock, and then selling it all off. He could do that, but there are also other avenues in which he could essentially achieve the same thing. That's why I'm setting this stage to talk about these different loopholes that are already being made known to the public.
Because right now, Democrats are trying to prevent him from being able to borrow against it, but there's nothing they can do. So
exactly, yeah, of course, right? And it just kind of seems to be, for some reason, the predominant response to anything around Donald Trump is that, that no matter how hard we try, there's just nothing we can do. We can stick him in court all day, but nothing ever seems to happen. But yeah,
everything he's doing, by the way, is technically legal.
Technically.
Yeah. Technically legal. It's loophole, it's snaky as it's shady as all get out, but it is technically legal.
Right, and that's the part that
that is the problem.
Are going to harp on, is that he's not technically breaking any laws. And I'm like, I'm not arguing that he is. I'm arguing that the fact that it's not illegal is the problem.
I agree with you, but it's also crazy that he's managed to pull this off.
Oh, 100%. I mean, he and his legal representation are masterminds in allowing him to slip through the hands of justice time and time again. But yeah, we were talking about the fact that he's not a member of the board, but from what I read, it looks like Donald Trump Jr. is, or is expected to be, former Republican Representative Devin Nunes, a person by the name of Robert Lighthizer, who was his former U.S. Trade Representative during his presidency, and a woman named Linda McMahon, who was his small business advisor during his presidency. So he has a bunch of ride-or-die lifers on the board representing him. There's no way this doesn't inherently directly benefit his financial status.
And not only that, it seems as if, From my understanding, the lion's share of investors and shareholders are also Trump supporters. So the people that bought into this, that gave him that get-out-of-jail-free card, essentially, they're also ride or die. And there was a New York Times business reporter called Matthew Goldstein. Matthew Goldstein went around and he interviewed a bunch of the people who had purchased into this stock, and especially ones that were buying large amounts. And he said they were fully cognizant of the fact that they could lose the money, but their loyalty to Trump is what kept them committed. And they viewed investing and staying in this with Trump as, quote, something much larger than just an investment. How does that make you feel?
Bloodbath. It's a bloodbath, that's what it is. It's an economic bloodbath. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, it makes me... Well, it doesn't make me feel too much different than I went into it with, because I assumed that all of this was propped up by his loyalists that would absolutely help him get out of whatever jam he may be in, because they are so unrelentingly in support of him that it's like, for this group of people, I don't think there is anything that you can actually do to convince them that he's not the savior of mankind and of the United States specifically. So it's inherently alarming that he has found not only a minor loophole, but a major one that allows him to avoid any responsibility for his actions because he can just convince a bunch of cultists to pay him money. I mean, you have similar issues with people like Alex Jones, and I'm sorry, but anyone who could be remotely attributed to the same kind of behavior set or personality as Alex Jones, I don't think we should be wanting these people to be presidents. But that's me, that's not them, clearly. Yeah, and then, you know, the company that they went into the merger with has all kinds of other interesting things about them. I didn't realize until researching this, they'd actually been trying to work this deal out since 2022, but it has been consistently pushed back because the shareholders don't want this, or didn't want this for an extended period of time. And then, hilariously enough, as soon as this ruling comes in, now all of a sudden they have unilateral support or majority support. And on March 19th, they file an SEC filing where their CEO, their longtime founder and CEO, Patrick Orlando, amidst, quote, unprecedented headwinds, was now suddenly going to be ousted and was no longer going to be in charge of the company. And they had promoted an interim CEO in Eric Swider, or Switter, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's just so, I don't know, there's just so much to it that just gives me this uneasy feeling, like pretty much everything involving Donald Trump, but this especially just irks me to a deeper degree.
You know what's really going to be interesting is if he wins the election, pardons himself, and now he keeps all his money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he wins. He wins.
I don't understand anyone who thinks that anything else would happen if he was elected. He's been transparent about it. That's what I was saying about him in the last episode, is it's not like he's lying about his intent. So the fact that we continue to just not have enough legal power to do anything about it is just wholly disheartening. And frankly, for me, going back to a broader conversation about, you know, different class divides and stuff like that, how are you supposed to convince a population that they should be, you know, in full adherence and faith in these systems if they don't hold people at the highest level accountable?
Because it is a two-tier system, right? Everyone thinks it's like one group like Republicans versus one group like Democrats, but it's not that. I'm not a class reductionist, but it's very clear at a certain point it is rich versus poor.
Oh, absolutely. Overwhelmingly so. And
like, do you think if you and I did half the shit that Trump has done, that our ass wouldn't be locked up in jail?
Even if you, like, for example, if you're a recipient of welfare, like Social Security, they make it explicit throughout the entire process that if at any point you misrepresent your income by $1, then you will be hit with a felony charge of perjury. A felony charge of perjury, and your ass will either be hit with so many debts that you can't pay back, or you'll be in actual prison for it. Meanwhile, you could defraud lenders of $400+ million, and, you know, it's sort of ambiguous as to whether or not you're actually going to be held accountable for that. And there's always these delays, these extensions, because, oh, well, I don't actually have the money. Okay, does not having the money at the present time work for any normal people? I think I've heard of one anecdotal evidence of somebody I know where it worked one time for like a speeding ticket, but other than that, they just throw you in jail if you can't pay those things. That's the whole point. And the fact that our legal system is so heavily leaned on financially based crimes means that it is inherently skewed towards the upper class, towards the wealthy.
It always will be.
And intentionally damning to the poor.
Yeah. As designed.
Yeah. So, you know, at this point, it's like, and then afterwards, because of all these stipulations that people are saying, oh, well, he may not be able to actually, bet against it, or he may not be able to directly, put that cash in his pocket because of all these provisions in place. So he had a backup plan, which is partnering with somebody to sell a ridiculously blasphemous version of a Bible, which, funny enough, a lot of Christians are mad at him, which is not something I expected. His loyalists love it, of course. but actual Christians, thankfully, have come out in avid disagreement and disdain for that.
But ultimately, they won't do anything about it.
Oh, well, sure. But the other thing that's crazy, so just to put one more, I did forget one piece of information that I thought was wild. So we talked about the peak $10 billion evaluation. It settled into $8 billion. This is an $8 billion valuation for a company that reported operating losses of $10.6 million against $3.4 million in revenue for last year.
I was actually just going to bring that up. I was going to ask how you reconcile those things.
You don't, because at the evaluation that it was given, that roughly translates to the company having a value of $1,100 per active user, because the site only has, I think, 7 to 8 million active users.
Yeah, it's like less than 2% of X.
Yeah, I was gonna say that number, $1,100 per user, is 10x of what it is for Reddit, and even more so for Twitter. Twitter, the most overly used, 224 million users, or whatever the number is now. So what you're saying is this site is that much more valuable than those? And yeah, if you really expect me to believe that, then I don't know what you think of the average person reading the news.
I just think it's wild that in one day he managed to get his media company worth more than all of the New York Times.
Right? Based on literally no tangible or factual information. It's crazy.
Yeah, man. He's winning the game.
Yeah, exactly. A game that none of us even get to play.
What's crazy is I wonder if he wins the election, like, it makes sense for him to keep this and not sell it, right? It makes sense for him to borrow against the stock, and then basically he can pardon himself of crimes, and then he can just continue to keep these investments racking up all this money, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there is nothing that I can foresee that inherently makes that impossible. I mean, the things that we thought would be impossible have already been proven to be possible by this guy.
Yeah, I think he could actually make way more money. Or
100%.
he'll sell it off at a certain point to another shell company, and they'll do another merger.
Oh yeah, it's gonna get tossed around for whomever is the highest bidder.
I actually think if he wins, he'll leave office richer than he went in, like the first time.
100%. Yeah, and the fact that this is just not covered by any sort of legality is insane to me. And the fact that the shell company fired their CEO right after making the decision to have this merger is just okay, sure. Yeah, nope, don't see any problems there. Yeah, no issues at all.
What the
business as usual.
Yeah, business as usual indeed. But one of the things that I find kind of sad about all this is, like, at the very beginning we talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene striking out to save the heart and soul of America, right? I genuinely think that rhetoric is in subconsciously or consciously in the minds of people as they're buying the Trump stock.
No, the people that are buying that stock actually think that they're saving the country and probably even the world by doing this.
Yes.
That is why I speak about these things, and I speak about rhetorical differences unlike the MAGA and Republicans. As much as I may make jokes of it at times, I in no way intend to communicate that I take this lightly, because it has a damning and massive impact on real life issues. And anyone who continues to dismiss these people as just annoyances in the background, Democrats being the biggest perpetrator of that, are inherently why it pisses me off so much. Because we're constantly just talking about these people as if they're these fringe lunatics, but they're not actually a threat to anything real. They're not actually a problem. Oh really? How much further can we go before you concede that?
I don't actually think they're also all that fringe, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people say that a lot of Republicans are fearful of Trump and they actually hate him behind closed doors. But I think they'll go where the power vacuum is, wherever the power lies, they'll co-sign just about anything. Now, for anyone that's into social sciences, there was a study that came out after the end of World War II, and they did this study over like several decades, and it basically showed that The American population were so vehemently patriotic that with the right person, the right messaging, and if they were to ever be basically infiltrated by certain ideologues, that they would be infinitely more fervent than the Nazis were. And there was a follow-up study to this. I guess it's not a direct follow-up, but it ran in tandem with this, that showed that the American flag doesn't necessarily create patriotic values, but rather instills patterns of thoughts of nationalism. Now, patterns of thoughts of nationalism and patriotism are actually not the same thing. So the reason I brought this up, I know it's a little out of left field, but the reason I brought it up is because as I'm seeing these people just blindly follow, and as they genuinely believe what they're doing is right, I call back to this study that I read years ago, and it's like, oh my God, maybe there's something to this. And I'm not saying this because a lot of liberals make the mistake. They make the mistake of constantly referring to everything as Nazis. Everything is racist. Everything's this. Everything's that, right? I'm not saying that to compare these people to Nazis. I'm saying this because there's something deeply wrong in the ideological movements that are going on in this country. And you can see that. You can see this spreading through the European countries as well. Like, America dealing with Trump is not an isolated incident. Look at what the is going on in Italy right now. Look at who's in power. Look at Mussolini's great-granddaughter having the amount of influence that she does. We're coming full circle. When I said a couple episodes ago, we're doing a full backslide, I wasn't exaggerating.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that this coincides with an era in which we have more access to information and immediate information than we ever had in the past. The fact that this is somehow becoming more and more predominant in lieu of that information baffles my mind. Well, it doesn't baffle it, because I see the people that are in charge of a lot of these media companies and they're directly responsible for a lot of this. But the fact that patriotism is the Trojan horse, right? It's the outward facing thing. But the reason that it's important to differentiate it from nationalism is you're talking about love versus obedience. Love is the sales tactic. Love is the, you gotta love your country, which means you'll do anything to defend it. But the nationalism is you will actually go along with and co-opt anything that we say, no matter how damaging it can be. If you're a patriot, if you're a real patriot, which is something that's just been completely hoarded by Republican rhetoric, because Democrats and liberals are not patriotic and they don't love their country. Well, I'm sorry, but the last time I checked, patriotism and a love for the country would mean that you actually wanted what was best for it and its citizenship. So to say that you're a patriot and to basically do everything to revert back to decades-old ways of living in which you actively promote racism, misogyny, you actually revert long-standing decisions for reproductive health and reproductive rights and things like that, you can't possibly continue to stand on that soapbox. It's nationalism, it's obedience, it's not love for your country. It has nothing to do with those things. You are just blindly letting dictators and fascists walk you into the future, and for some reason you've been consumed by the same closed loops of thought that you can't see it for yourself.
The more that we talk about this, and especially referencing those studies, I think back for years, I don't know about you, but for years, especially growing up in the South, you hear this narrative amongst everyone, especially if you're in white communities, about, you remember when right after World War II, when men were men and women were women, wasn't America just a better time for everyone? Yada, 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 right? Don't get it twisted. There were positives post World War II, right? Like, you had the economic boom, but aside from the Italians, the blacks, the Irish that were still suffering, women still didn't have a lot of rights. But I mean, in terms of economic surge, America really benefited post World War II. But I wonder how much of those narratives and those talking points go into subconsciously funneling people or priming them for these other more insidious movements later down the road.
Well, yeah, because at the heart of the economic boom that you're talking about is the end of the, largest, greatest war in modern history. A lot of that economy was propped up by the military-industrial complex, something that we were warned about by the president that came in right after World War II ended, or at the tail end of World War II. When he left office, his entire monologue was about the threat that the military-industrial complex was going to pose to American society, and we just kind of blatantly ignored it. And then we launched right into the Cold War. Fear-mongering has been at the heart of American values and at the heart of American progress, in quotes, since I can remember. I mean, even looking back and studying history all the way back to post-revolution leading into the Civil War, fear-mongering was honestly the tip of the spear for most of what was driving American citizens. This isn't even new. Conceptually, there's nothing new about this. We've just added and inflated the way that we present this fear-mongering, and we have new mediums to do it through now. Instead of legacy media, now we're doing it through legacy media and social media. The same prevalent fears have always been latent in the American population because it's driven the American population. So the fact that...
I know. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, so it's asinine to me that we oftentimes, not you and I specifically, but other people have this conversation as if this is like a new thing. So it's like it's been pushed below the surface for a little while, but it never takes much for it to come back up. And right now we're in the period in which it's bubbling back up.
No, I understand. I agree with you. Fear has always been a cornerstone for this country, whether it was things dealing with slavery, Reconstruction, civil rights, the Cold War, basically every war in history, the Red Scare, you know what I mean? It's always been a thing. However, I wonder, that's the foundation, but I wonder, what other components have gone into building on that fear? Does that make sense? I'm processing in real time. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, for me, all of these things also become really... They become easier to magnify when you have different economic issues as well. I think if you look at the history of multiple nations, not just the US, every time or any time things economically become a struggle, or the experience for the average American becomes a struggle, it's much easier to incite these fears. And right now we're in a period in which a lot of the preconceived ideas that we had about the way the world was run and operated are starting to fracture a little bit. We're starting to, because of the age of the internet and social media, we're starting to understand that the history of the way things have been done are not as glamorous as we thought that they were. And I think that that's pushing a lot of people, for example, a lot of, traditional Republicans, conservatives, Christians, they're being convinced that this enlightenment, or as they say, this awakening or wokeism, is going to push them out of existence. They think that the very essence of who they are and everything that they've been raised on is about to be destroyed, and that it's a concerted effort from their political opposition. So you have a multifaceted approach that leads to this insane, overinflation of the prevalence of fear in this country. And I think the fact that, and then you throw in things like a pandemic, which, yeah, I know I said that I don't really want to talk about the pandemic too much, but we can't deny the impact that it's had on the social welfare of this country. The political discourse has been rampantly and exponentially worsened since the pandemic started. And I think it's just planted more and more seeds and created wedges in these sort of cracks on the infrastructure of American society. And I think it's just pulling people apart.
Do you think that there's any immediate solution outside of get involved in civics and get involved in community building?
I think for me, there has to be a response at the base level. To expect a top-down solution to this is incredibly... I think it's potentially really damaging, and as much as I would want something like that to happen, I don't see how it could manifest. I don't see how a top-down solution would be able to sort of put a cork back in that bottle or how to temporarily, alleviate or ameliorate some of these concerns.
A top-down solution only works for small groups with money and interest.
Exactly. And the people with money and interests actually have a concerted, or they have a direct investment in making these matters worse, not making them better.
Which is why you and I have discussed that it takes a bottom-up and top-down solution working at the same time to facilitate any change, right? Because
Absolutely.
you can just have a top-down system with a few people with power infiltrate the bottom-up solution and just sabotage the fuck out of it.
Yeah, no, it has to come from both sides, but in reality, as far as what I'm going to go out there and recommend to the average person, as much as it sounds, hopefully doesn't sound, I don't want it to sound dismissive, because I really do strongly believe that there needs to be a better sense of accountability and effort from the top down. It starts with us. It starts with the individual. It starts with people wanting to engage more in a positive and healthy manner with their community. It starts with people not being afraid to have discourse or dissent amongst each other. Because right now we're in this state where it feels like everyone is like afraid to engage in more serious discussions. It feels like everyone is hit with this heightened level of social anxiety, and they're not able to process the emotional reaction that they may have from somebody being of their political opposition. And I get that for certain sentiments. Like if I have conversations with people that are just blatantly racist or just blatantly misogynist, just do nothing but permeate, baseless conspiracy theories, yeah, I'm going to be a little bit more impatient with those people, but I'm not going to not speak to them. Because I think what we need to start realizing is a lot of the average Americans are being just blatantly manipulated by structures larger than ourselves. And if you really want to unify, if you want to pull people together and actually see things start to influence change, if you want to put pressure on your politicians and on, your corporate overlords, so to speak, for change, you have to come together as a people to put that pressure on them. Because if you actually use your majority, if you use your population, you have leverage. Right now, they're trying to divide people up so that way we don't have leverage. We're never going to have enough people to have leverage over politicians, to have leverage over policy. And that's exactly what the population is for. That's what democracy is supposed to be for, is for us to be able to actually come to the table and have these discussions and use them to get what we need.
That's true. And I don't have anything that I disagree with about what you said on the surface. The problem lies when you have people that you will discuss things with, right? But you maybe, not you specifically, because you're really articulate and you're very concise with the way that you approach certain things and certain topics and specific people. But for the average person who's talking to, like you said, a racist or a misogynist, those were the examples you used. Maybe they don't know how to refute some of the things that are said. Maybe they are also themselves ignorant and they're being fed this information by someone, because make no mistake, a lot of these groups seek to recruit. They're not there in good faith to have a conversation. They're not there to build community. They're there to build themselves up. So
that's true. There is an inherent level of malice that is also poisoning the well, a metaphor that I use a lot. But and that's where some other more like top-down solutions need to take place. I think sites that exchange media and news and these different sentiments need to be more heavily moderated. I think people like Elon and his frivolous approach to his massive social media site that has sort of become the hotbed for all of these conspiracy theories and these racist epithets. I think that they need to be held much more accountable for what they allow to be said. But I agree that there's only so much you can do for certain extreme examples of people. But right now, I think we have a problem where the majority of Americans assume that somebody that is just on their political opposite is one of these fringe crazy people, and that's a direct result of media manipulation. That's why I'm saying we can't shy away from the discussions, because you may go into a conversation with a Republican or with a Democrat or progressive or a liberal or a conservative and assume that they're either a crazy MAGA cultist or that they're some, insane woke pro whatever sort of awful thing on their side of the spectrum that you want. And if you actually sat down and had a conversation with them, you'd realize that you guys are a lot closer in your ideologies than you.
And that is the thing. That's the thing I think a lot of people forget, is that they have more in common than they don't. And most people want safety, security. If they have families, they want to be able to provide for them. If they don't, they want to either have the opportunity to be able to have a family, or at least provide for themselves or a loved one. So regardless of like political leaning or ideological belief, most people have more in common than they don't.
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of one of the reasons that you and I wanted to do this show, is because we wanted to demonstrate that even if there are things that you disagree on, the whole point is that if you're unwilling to have the conversation, then you're unwilling to try to work towards positive change.
True.
I mean, that's the way I see it. So
Very true.
if you're shying away from it because you're nervous about what the person's going to say or what they might potentially believe, then you're creating and curating your own version of reality. And if Americans are constantly creating their own version of reality, they do one of two things, or possibly two things simultaneously. They both, one, leave way too much agency for influence from people that don't have your best interests at heart, or two, don't realize that it's actually the unified effort of people coming together that fosters that change.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm glad we could kind of finish that out on a slightly more positive note, because we've had some sad stories today.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we talk about the headaches that are happening, the awful things that happen around the world, and especially in the U.S., the purpose of why we're here is to try to instill a sense of motivation and hope. Because once you lose that, there's way too much work on the uphill that has to be done to reclaim it. So if we give up all semblance of this idealized version, this I'm going to say it, this patriotism, this desire to make the country that you're a part of actually better. I would love to live in a world in which the average American truly believed that they lived in a country they could be proud of. That seems to me like an obvious objective. And while some people may disagree on the specifics of how you achieve that, I don't think I would find anybody that would disagree with that desire. We just need to make sure that we're coming to the table and having well thought out and well intentioned conversations as to what we're going to do to make it better.
Yeah. And if you're not liking solutions that people present to you, come up with your own, or sit down with people to help you figure out your own. That's something that you and I have done.
Exactly. Even if you have to start
small. We have more to come.
Yeah, if you want to start small, it's at least a start. Saying that the problem is too big and therefore you're not going to do anything, even in your local area, to make things better, means that you're complicit with that problem. I'm sorry to call you out if that makes you feel called out, but that's the truth.
And I'm sorry, if you're a Christian or a religious person, I feel like you have a moral obligation to do something. Like, you can't just sit on your hands and pray away, like, whatever, and wait for God to return. Because if you believe in the Bible, then you know that when God shows up, it's too late. So you have a moral obligation to do what's best for your fellow man and the environment and the planet, and set that standard.
Yeah, I mean, the world's population is dominated by people that still hold to some major religious faith. Where are these voices? I'm sorry, maybe I'm just not seeing them, but I'm not seeing a unified voice that is allowing people to actually champion the things that they claim to believe and live by. This ethos that they've always stood by of taking care of your neighbor, making the world a better place, living to a higher moral standard. We're letting our politicians run rampant by violating all of these tenets. And no, it's not because some of them are religious or aren't religious. Right now we have a self-proclaimed avid Christian presidential candidate running against a very well-known and well-established Catholic incumbent president. These are people that are supposedly representations of these belief systems. So if that's the case, then I don't have a lot of good faith in these organizations or in these faiths, but I know that there are good people that are common throughout all of them. And I really think that this is an opportunity for them to show it.
I agree with you, and I think that especially even if they're not religious, a lot of atheist people still have Judeo-Christian values for being raised in a Judeo-Christian society, right? If you are religious, like, I would say read your book more, because isn't Jesus the one that says judge a tree by the fruit that it bears? So we have politicians who say one thing, they have silver tongues. Inversely, they're poisoning water wells, they're taking away people's rights, they're doing everything they possibly can to get stupid rich, dummy rich, and then rob you blind.
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially a collection of false prophets and charlatans running rampant.
I like that.
And so, but yeah, make no mistake, I'm not letting atheists and agnostics off the hook here. Just because you don't have a codified text that your ethics essentially stem from, most of the reason that a lot of these people claim to be atheists or agnostics is because they have issues with the actions of people from organized faiths and religions. So
no, I agree with you.
Be the change you want to see in the world, and make that a positive change, because apparently if we all get together in the same room and talk about what we believe, a lot of it seems to be the same. We all want prosperity, we all want safety, we all want a better economy, we all want healthier communities, we all want to feel like we're a part of something greater than ourselves, whether that be a society, a collective, or some, extension of God or whatever faith it may be. And yet I hear a lot of people talking about those desires. I don't see a lot of people putting in the work.
I agree with you. And I think all these different fractures of identity politics are all extensions of what you just described.
Absolutely. Yeah, the identity politics being at the forefront of our sort of our daily news cycle, the media prerogative and the government prerogative seems to be pitting your ideologies and your identities against one another. That's exactly what I would do if I didn't want people to realize that they could actually come together and make this place better for them rather than better for me.
Yeah. That's how they get you. That's how they maintain control. So
100%.
But last, now that we've talked about manipulation, the potential rug pull / corporate loopholes and all of this stuff with like Wall Street, we've discussed politicians failing to do their job, we've discussed tragedy. The last one is kind of a mixture of all of these things.
Yeah, and we talked about Trump, and the last topic that we really started on was Trump being a great fraudster, but I think this next guy kind of puts him to shame, really.
Yeah, I think this guy might be the most badass man on the internet.
Yeah, and he's definitely at the forefront of the conversation right now, so let's go ahead and launch into it.
Yes, so I'm sure everyone's heard there's a gentleman named Sam Bankman-Fried who was the founder of a cryptocurrency company called FTX. It essentially was like a crypto Ponzi scheme from my understanding. It had a ton of celebrity backing. I think they did Super Bowl ads at one point. They had all these different investors. He had his own hedge fund, and they would Alameda, thank you. And they would use FTX to basically get people to invest. That they'd take the money from the investments, from the money from the crypto, they would either make risky investments or they would use it to pay previous investors back to give the illusion of like a return on their investment to keep the bottom from falling out of the cryptocurrency. He was recently sentenced to 25 years in prison, right? But
Yep.
The prosecutor wanted 50 or 60, which is still down because originally he was looking at over 100. And he was found guilty on 7 charges, everything from like money laundering to security fraud. So this guy is he's a Poindexter, but he's an intellectual gangster.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, the Alameda Research, which is a firm that was operated by the same person, Sam Bankman-Fried, they held a large amount of a specific cryptocurrency token known as FTT. While holding those tokens, a rival cryptocurrency exchange called Binance, which is a massive company that is also worth billions of dollars in this industry, they had released information that they had planned to sell all their holdings in that same FTT token, and that they actually had an intent to buy out or acquire FTX because it was clear that they had some liquidity issues, like you mentioned earlier. But that was based on the condition that they could actually look deeper into their books. They got a minor glance into the books on FTX, and Binance immediately said there is no way in hell we want anything to do with this company. It is beyond reprieve, it is beyond saving with the amount of liquidity issues they have. And they were saying that they were surprised that they were still around, basically. Meanwhile, just as a reminder, while this is happening, the price of all crypto coins, especially Bitcoin, were plummeting as a direct reaction to this stuff. And this was back in 2022. And then on November 11th of that same year, FTX filed for bankruptcy. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO, but they had filed for bankruptcy with an evaluation of anywhere from 10 to 50 billion with a B dollars, listing that they had more than 130 affiliated companies that were helping contribute to that evaluation, and that they had, that was a reasonable evaluation of their assets.
Sorry, real quick, just so I understand, that was what caused the bottom to fall out of the other half of the company, right?
Yeah, because they were saying that they had gotten insight into FTX's books, essentially, like their business proceedings and their financial status, and they were in a dire condition.
Yeah, so I knew that, but I mean, when they pulled out, when they said we want nothing to do with this, it basically hemorrhaged the FTX, right? Because they were basically banking on them going through with that merger, right?
Correct. It was like the last chance that they had to save them, or to obfuscate the reality of their issues. But thankfully, Binance kind of had suspicions, but yeah, as soon as Binance revealed the extent to what they discovered and the fact that they were not going to touch FTX with a 10-foot pole, it just immediately caused this catastrophic snowball effect for FTX and for Sam Bankman-Fried. But yeah, and then, so after they filed for bankruptcy, they removed him, or he resigned from the CEO position. A gentleman by the name of John Ray III was put in as a temporary CEO. This person, some of you may know, some of you don't, I wasn't aware of this, is the same litigator that was put in as temporary CEO of Enron, which is another company that had a massive financial scam plague their company and file for bankruptcy as a result. He's basically the cleanup guy. So they put him in place because they could tell that there was massive fraud and hemorrhaging funds that were just running rampant. So they put this guy in place to see to what extent was actually happening. Well, not long after they put him in that position, he gave a damning testimony that their business practices were exceedingly fraudulent and shady. They were using funds to not only do the things that you had mentioned earlier, but they were also using funds from investors and clients to buy private homes, personal homes for themselves and other employees, and they were blowing money on other luxurious expenditure. I mean, just like the most obvious case of fraud that I can really think of. I think it's about as cut and dry as it gets. So on December 12th of 2022, they arrested Sam Bankman-Fried in the Bahamas, where the company FTX is headquartered. He was originally charged with, or they were seeking charges of 8 criminal violations, like you said, ranging anywhere from wire fraud to money laundering to conspiracy to commit fraud, etc. While he was awaiting trial in December of that year, his parents actually had to sign a $250 million bond, and then they advocated to keep him in their home in California while he awaited the trial. He was convicted of that fraud on November 3rd of 2023, sentenced as of March 28th, 2024. But yeah, like you said, the original sought sentence was like 110 years in prison. And part of that was actually because that was codified and deemed reasonable under current federal government guidelines for sentencing. So it actually would have been reasonable for him to receive a 100-year sentence in prison based on his crimes. Some of the predominant reasons that he was going to be hit with even greater penalties was because during his trial, he was also found guilty of witness tampering, On August 11th of 2023, during this trial, the judge actually revoked that $250 million bail and sent him to jail because he was found guilty of multiple counts of witness tampering. So he's actively manipulating the jury and actively manipulating witnesses during the trial for things that he had already pretty clearly committed. But somehow he was managed to get reduced down to 25 years under two primary premises. Ironically, the first being that because he was thrown in jail for the witness tampering, he was actually given less access to his representation, which is just insane to me. And two, they had come to the court with evidence that the defendant in this case was neurodivergent and suffered from, or was diagnosed with autism. So they made the argument that he wasn't this malicious manipulator and bad faith actor. They used terms like supervillain or, a criminal mastermind. They even made arguments that somehow persuaded the court that he was just he was a normal guy that liked to play video games and he was a vegan, etc., etc. Apparently all this was relevant.
That's why he's in jail for 25 years, is because they said vegan.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and they also said that it was because there was things in place to, quote, eventually pay back customers and investors in full. Eventually. So because eventually these people may get their money back that they were defrauded of, he should get a reduced sentence. It's actually crazy. His lawyers originally asked for 5 years.
I think it was sentencing. 5 years with a year probation.
Yeah, and there's actually still potential now that during his current 25-year sentence, he could be out of jail in 12 years.
He will be, bro.
No, 100%. He's a vegan, and he loves video games. The settled 25 years was supposedly sufficient to send a message to the industry that it needed to up its game in terms of transparency and securities to prevent these things from happening in the future. He was still forced to forfeiture of upwards of $11 billion to compensate victims of his crimes. So, again, it kind of, to me, leads credence that even though he ended up in prison, I'm highly cynical and skeptical of the fact that he'll serve the full 25 years. And we're talking about, like, more money than governments have. There are countries that are not worth anywhere near $10 billion. And this guy was able to defraud people of that amount of money.
When they arrested him, maybe I'm thinking of someone else, but when they arrested him, wasn't this motherfucker drinking Mai Tais on a beach? On a private beach? He was living his best life.
He was in his private estate in the Bahamas, because that's where they listed the headquarters for the company. And he was having a great time. There was actually, I remember vaguely this being a huge story as it was developing. And they were trying everything they could to get enough evidence to go and arrest him. But yeah, when they showed up, he looked like the freaking Wolf of Wall Street. He was kicked back. He had beautiful women around him, sipping Mai Tais. He was living in this big mansion area, like this big resort. So this is a person who, despite the legal arguments that were made, I'm not going to let him off the hook. I'm pretty certain he knew exactly what he was doing the entire time.
I mean, I had heard that as much came out in testimony. I'd also heard he had perjured himself at one point. So
yeah, I mean, we have witness tampering, we have perjury, we have like the greatest,
an additional seven felony charges.
Yeah, but he's just a guy who likes video games and veganism. So this is really kind of harsh, don't you think? It opens a broader conversation that I think you and I alluded to. We would kind of go more in depth with future content to specifically highlight the issues surrounding cryptocurrency as a whole, because there are some other stories that have recently come to our attention that
we got some doozies in the chamber for you guys, so stay tuned for future episodes.
Yeah, I mean, cryptocurrency, it's an interesting conversation because it's a complete, it's a paradigm shift away from the currencies that we've knowingly used for the last, century, essentially. And so it is a big thing that is challenging a lot of the preconceived structures of our society globally, not just in the US. But it's not off to a great start.
It's not. And I guess I'll be super cynical about this. This is just my opinion. I don't have any facts at the forefront to substantiate the claims I'm about to make, but I don't think it would be difficult for me to procure them. I think when they say they're sending a message to the industry about transparency, I think that's utter bullshit. What I think happened is, and I've said this to you before in person, if you steal from poor people, you get rich. If you steal from rich people, you go to jail. What I think happened is that he got on the wrong side of some real movers and shakers, and he got clapped for it. I think, and this, I'm going to preface this because we're going to talk about a specific instance in Honduras that's going on linked to cryptocurrency next week. It's a story I'm passionate about. I think that if the shoe is on the other foot, if you look at things going on in Honduras with cryptocurrency, they're poor, they're not getting justice. He just happened to steal from rich people. That's what I really think the long and short of all of this is. He just happened to rip off the wrong people.
Well, 100%. And make no mistake about it, I know that you and I may disagree to some degree on this, maybe multiple degrees, but I've been saying this for a long time. I don't know how much you and I have talked about it, but I think cryptocurrency as a technology is inevitable in terms of its adaptation and adoption at the federal level, at government level. We already know that there are governments that are adopting it as a recognized form of currency.
China's already doing it.
China's doing it. El Salvador openly holds a large portion of their money in Bitcoin.
Yes.
I believe other countries, I think even Turkey at one point was talking about doing the same thing. You have alliances like BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are toying around with this idea that they may actually try to develop their own digital currency. There's not a lot of credence to that. I think a lot of that is a scare tactic. That's just a paper tiger, so to speak. But the fact is, the US government also has made statements that allude to a potentiality for a digital form of currency. Now, I'm not going to go down this conspiratorial rabbit hole because I know that the digital currency has become a huge weapon of conspiracy for like the crazy right-wing MAGA cultists. So I'm not going to try to give them too much ammunition on this, but I'm not going to lie and say that I haven't seen some of the same press releases that they have. This is something that's going to probably be a part of our next generation's future, or, you know, our grandchildren's generation. And the fact that it's getting off to such a overtly negative start means that, I mean, shit needs to be addressed now.
Yeah, I don't think we actually disagree on this, because it is an inevitability, I would agree. How it's regulated, I think, is maybe what we disagree on, or how it should be implemented we might disagree on, but that's like a future conversation. But
yeah,
on the surface of what you just said, I mean, there's nothing to disagree with. It's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, but the other reason that I mention it, and the reason I think it's important to mention that it's in my opinion, an inevitability, and in yours, is that, like you said, he messed with the wrong people. He crossed the wrong lines. There are people that have overwhelmingly poured billions, trillions of dollars into cryptocurrency, and it's currently being weaponized to do a lot of harm in certain parts of the world, like you alluded to, the thing we're going to talk about more in depth next week with Honduras. And that's just one example. But yeah, he just played with the wrong people's money, and they put him in the guillotine. But make no mistake, this is just an example of overly wealthy people being able to kind of circumnavigate their own scrutiny by putting somebody else up as a martyr.
Yeah, and if he'd stolen all that money and he'd made billions of dollars off poor people, I think he would be hailed as like the premier crypto bro. He would be a brilliant entrepreneur. He'd be a self-made man. Insert whatever buzzword you want.
Yeah, and in fact, to my understanding, there's not a ton of other cases of, especially to this scale, of crimes committed in the cryptocurrency space or fraud committed in the cryptocurrency space. There's one other major one. I forget the name of the woman, but she was associated with the, she was like deemed the queen of crypto or something. who, by the way, the queen of crypto that I'm referring to, I don't believe has been found either. She's still at large. But one of her known associates was also found guilty of contributing to $4 billion worth of fraud. And that's also in the cryptocurrency space. And the reason that they got ousted is because, just like Sam Bankman-Fried, they went after the wrong people's money.
Yep. I can guarantee she's either in a country that doesn't allow for extradition or she's dead.
Yeah, and, you know, I would imagine, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, her name is Ruja Ignatova, or Ruha Ignatova. And to my understanding, I think she still hasn't been caught. There's documentaries coming out about her and all this stuff, but she was the founder of something called OneCoin that was used in the same way that FTX was to scam billions of dollars. And then, unlike Sam Bankman, instead of chilling out in the Bahamas with a Mai Tai, she disappeared off the fucking map and no one knows where she is.
Like I said, she's either in a country that, this is my belief, she's either in a country that doesn't allow for extradition, so if they do find her, it doesn't fucking matter, or she's dead because she ripped off the wrong people, they found her, and it's game over.
Yeah, no, I'd be curious. I know she's Bulgarian born, but yeah, we have no idea. The fact that we don't even have like if she was dead, you'd think that there would probably be some indication of that by now, but she is just a ghost.
Fascinating. We'll have to look more into that. I'm sure that she will be a topic of conversation in the very near future.
Yeah, I mean, she's already kind of recirculating on conversations surrounding Sam Bankman-Fried because she's another example of somebody that defrauded billions of dollars from investors through the lens of cryptocurrency. So,
yeah, it's shaping up to be a really, really interesting 2024, man.
Oh god, yeah, and we're still in the first quarter of it, so we have a lot more to go.
But this is, I think a good point to kind of wrap up for people. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. I'm sorry, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the cryptocurrency stuff?
No.
Sam Bankman-Fried's a hero. No, I'm just kidding. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. Thank you for joining us on our 4th episode. We do have some quick announcements at the end here. Let me do a disclaimer. If you hear dogs barking in the background, we apologize. We're a pet-friendly broadcast, but we've been having some technical issues the last couple episodes, so thanks for bearing with us. We are branching out slowly but surely. We're going to be uploading our podcast to Pocket Casts now, as well as iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. So go check us out if you happen to be a Pocket Cast member. And a follow-up from last week. I know this was a super important topic to you. We reported on the whistleblower last week. And what happened this week?
In a not-so-shocking turn of events for people that have been following Boeing's history like we have, the CEO has announced that he is to step down and a management shakeup is to occur in light of all of these events.
And you would say this is probably clear obfuscation?
I think so. I mean, I'm sure somebody will tell me that it's about something else. I mean, it's both it's a culmination of the engineering failures and defects that Boeing planes have had this year, and then the whistleblower being found dead is kind of like the last straw, it seems, because it's not long after that. I mean, the story I'm reading about, it was published as of the 25th of March, is that he announced that he's stepping down.
But he's not stepping down. He's not stepping down till the end of the year.
Right, of course, yeah.
Which tells me he's gonna get a nice severance package.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they got to make sure he's taken care of. He's joining a well-documented history of Boeing CEOs stepping down amidst controversy.
Got to get that in that great hush money, bro.
Oh, of course, yeah. Or he'll end up in the parking lot of a Holiday Inn. One reason or another.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh man. On that note, was there anything you want to leave everyone with?
No, I just wanted to. I know that we had like a bit of a call to action there, and then we pivoted into our last topic that we wanted to discuss. But I do really just want to end on the strong note of people taking it upon themselves to try and foster the improvements in their societies and communities that they wish to see. I just feel very strongly about it. I'm very passionate about that in terms of action and engagement. So I really want people to take away, if nothing else from this episode, sort of that call to action.
Absolutely.
Stay safe, everyone. Take care of each other and challenge yourselves.